You will recall that in our general overview session, we talked about the service delivery components having an impact on the three general areas at the top of the cube. Our discussion today is about a process we call curriculum enrichment infusion, where we're trying to provide some instructional strategies for teachers so that they can examine a regular curricular topic and then look for some ways of jazzing up this topic by selecting and infusing into the regular curricular activity some enrichment experiences that will make the topic more interesting, engaging, and enjoyable for all students. And the first question I want to deal with is, why is this important? Fortunately or unfortunately, as the case may be, so much of what we do in school is based on prescribed curriculum, either by things like the Common Core state standards or ministry prescribed curriculum. And so one of the things that we can almost guarantee is that this is not going to change in the short term. So what we'd like to do is to design ways of simply jazzing up the regular curriculum with our magical little device that you see in the upper right-hand corner being used as our metaphor. So let's take the regular curriculum and let's add some spices to it, and let's add some vegetables, different spices, and pretty soon what we have is a more enjoyable regular curriculum. Oftentimes, I love this quotation, we cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust our sails. And so we're not going to be able to get rid of the regular curriculum, but we can make some adjustments that will make it more interesting for students. The metaphor that I like to use is this little device, and I usually ask people if they know what this device is. And usually in a group of 50 or 100 people, 2 or 3 people might raise their hands. So I give them a big hint, and here's the hint. How do you get the jelly in the jelly donut? So what we're trying to do is not get rid of the jelly donut, but just to make it a little bit more attractive by infusing some enrichment. To do this, we've developed a form which is designed to guide teachers in the use of infusion. And we call it the Creative Idea Generator. And you're going to see some examples of this in just a minute. But the first thing we do is to ask teachers to pick a topic from the regular curriculum that they would like to try to enrich with some activities through the infusion process. We have a big pile of books, and buried in that pile is U.S. states and capitals, which all American children have to memorize at some time, and also multiplication tables. This example comes from a group of teachers I worked with a few years back, where I asked them what were the 2 most memory-oriented things that they did in their teaching. And the key words to this process are selection. We're going to pick a topic. We're going to infuse it into the curriculum. And then for youngsters that really get excited or turned on about the infusion activity, giving them a chance to do extensions or follow-up. And we've really had some great examples come out of this, which I'll be sharing with you shortly. I love this quotation by Ben Franklin. If you would persuade, you must appeal first to interest rather than intellect. So we're going to start with the group that I worked with, and I asked them to divide up into groups of 2 or 3 teachers and to brainstorm ways that they could make states and capitals more interesting. And I'm just going to flash on the screen all of the different ideas that they came up with. Actually, they came up with 24 ideas in 10 minutes. And I think the key to the infusion process is that teachers themselves must be more creative. And it's a great opportunity for teachers that teach the same subject to sit around in a small group and say, today we're teaching the generals and battles of the Civil War. What are some things that we can do to make this topic more interesting rather than just memorizing the names and dates for the test that we're going to give on the Civil War? So, just a few examples. One teacher developed a very large map of the United States on the floor of her classroom, and children cut out the different pieces and fitted them together, and they taped it on the floor of the classroom. And then she developed some activities. One was a hopscotch activity, believe it or not, where you could hop from one state to another beginning with the first letter of the state. So Indiana to Illinois was easy, Iowa was a little harder, and Idaho was very hard. They were asked to look at states and see if they resembled anything. And one of the things that the kids came up with was New Jersey resembles an Indian head, and Louisiana is shaped like a rain boot, and that Iowa looks like a face. And so all of that just made the topic of learning about states and capitals more interesting. One of my favorites was based on one of the teacher's ideas, where they developed a matching quiz. This is one of 5 pages where they list the name of the state on the left-hand side and then some characteristic about the state, which meant that the children had to go and do some research to find out the state characteristic that matched the state. This is all, again, very creative, and I might also add very enjoyable for children. Remember the 3 E's: enjoyment, engagement, and enthusiasm for learning. Now, one group of students really got turned on. They found a company that actually makes state-shaped cookie cutters. And they found this on the internet, and everybody asks me, so I'm going to give you the site for where you can get that if you would like. And what they did was they started a little cookie cutter state baking company. And they rolled out the dough, and then they went around to different classrooms and they talked about the states, and the children had to put a chocolate dot where the state capital was. And they actually, this was a year-long project that all resulted from just simply the idea of studying states and capitals in a more creative way. Infusion can sometimes be carried out simply by asking different kinds of questions. And so I'm going to give you yet another example that came from my group that said that memorizing times tables was very memory and routine oriented. So 2 questions. The first one is, how much is 6 times 4? You will recognize that this is a question with a single predetermined correct answer, and of course the children all came up with 24. Then she asked, how many different ways can you make 24? And these are some of the responses that the young people came up with. They sent them to me and I sort of pasted them together. Something for youngsters that are very slow in mathematics or very young children. Something as simple as 23 plus 1 equals 24. 22 plus 2 equals 24. But look at the way that the process escalates very quickly when they have to try different types of multiplication and then adding basic skills together like addition and subtraction, and multiplication. And here's another example. And I talked to a mathematician about this later on, and he said that there are literally an infinite number of ways to make 24. So youngsters that are very advanced in mathematics can do something that is much more challenging and much more creative than youngsters that can only come up with 23 plus 1 equals 24. So think about the kinds of open-ended questions that you can raise as a part of the infusion process. Other things that teachers came up with, and these are all ideas that I got from teachers, but this comes from the same group that I just mentioned. They had students do poetry, sing quain and limericks and things like that. 8 times 8 went out the door, came back married as 64. So a lot of fun and cleverness, but it's also making math much more fun. So these are all examples that I got from teachers. The most important part for me is teachers themselves becoming more creative in the process. Becoming more creative and also making a topic much more interesting. Here are some infusion ideas, again, from other teachers as I did workshops on infusion around the country. This is a teacher that's teaching algebra through the use of Barbie dolls. And what she did was she gave each group of children a box of rubber bands, and they chain linked the rubber bands together and tied them to Barbie's feet. Then they went up to the top of the stadium and they dropped Barbie over the edge and saw who could make their Barbie come the closest to the ground without hitting her head. And then the teacher went back and showed them how all of this can be developed in an algebraic formula. Here's another high school example from geometry, where the young people were making a certain kind of a triangle based on a bunch of small triangles that they made. Here's a wonderful example from literature. The children were studying Anne Frank, but they went on the internet and they found lots of places that they could go and get actual original documents and firsthand information about Anne Frank. Here's an example actually from history. It's called The Night of the Notables, and there's a little boy named Kenyon pictured with me. And the children were given an opportunity to select a favorite hero that they would like to study about. And then they became that hero. So here's Kenyon playing the role of Guion Bluford, the first African-American astronaut. And they had to become that person, learned all about them, and then they gave short presentations, after which they went to a station and they sat down at their table and people could come up and ask them questions. So here's just a list of the many famous people that the children represented. And the history became so much more alive to them. They had to have the dress of the person, they had to answer questions related to the person's life and the person's deeds. Here's developing math skills through a fantasy baseball program. All of this comes from an online site that you see on the screen. And this is a wonderful school-wide example. This is from a school district in Georgia where they established their own district-wide museum. And over the course of the year, different groups were responsible for developing a theme for the museum, and then they would set up displays of their work, and students from other schools could come and visit. And also it was open a couple of evenings so that parents could come and see what's going on. And talk about teacher creativity. This was all from the ideas of teachers. Here's an example of some of the how-to books that were made available to these young people so that they could learn the ins and outs of setting up their own museum. How-to books are really one of the most valuable things that you can provide to teachers to help them find ways of developing the infusion process. I love this next example. This is a teacher who had combined digital technology and book reports, and she actually had the students do a book report. You'll see a young girl giving her book report using digital technology.
Hi, I'm Catherine, and I'm from Mr. Wonderham's class, and I read the book Sign of the Beaver by Elizabeth George Spear. This story is about a boy named Matt who is left alone to guard his family's property in Maine, while his father fetches his family in Massachusetts. While Matt is guarding his family's property, he encounters a lot of things, like having a man steal his gun, and then comes face to face with an Indian tribe. Matt grows fond of the Indians, and when they tell him that they are leaving and ask him to join them, Matt is stumped, but decides to wait for his family a little longer. In the end, Matt's family comes and he tells all his stories of his experiences. My favorite part is when Matt and an Indian boy named Tian kill a fully grown bear. I recommend this book to people that like adventure and history. I rate this book with 3 stars.
This is a very simple primary example based on the ABCs. And this group of teachers came up with about 20 different ideas of making the ABCs more interesting. Here's another one that I like a great deal. A young man at the Renzulli Academy in Hartford, Connecticut. They were reading the book Green Eggs and Ham. And so he asked the teacher if he could prepare some green eggs and ham for the children's lunch. And so the teacher worked with him to find out how to do this and get the right color and very safe dye to mix in with the eggs. And so you can just tell by the look on his face how excited he is about this. Here's one just on the topic of birds, and it comes, I believe, from a science unit, and I think you'll see there many, many different ideas and different ways that young people can study about birds. This next one is one that I like also as a high school example. This is a teacher in Connecticut who challenges each small group of students at the end of any unit in an AP physics class. He asks them to then try to develop a project that applies what they learned in the AP physics class. And the example that I have here is that this group of students built a camera mounted to a balloon, which they could then release and fly into the air, and it could not only take pictures of the Earth from several thousand feet up, but there were also devices attached that would collect different kinds of data, temperature data and barometric pressure data and things like that.
Who's got the wire snips? Okay, I don't want them yet, but when we do want them, we're gonna call for them, okay? I need somebody to run the helium. Go ahead, you got it, Dean. Open her up. Whoa!
You guys gonna hold the sheet? I don't know. Summer in there. And you guys hold on to them. We're letting, yeah. Brendan and me gonna go. Yeah.
I don't care who lets go at this point.
2, 1, go.
Whoa, baby!
Yes, that's fine. Okay, let's see.
All right, we don't have enough lift yet, but we got some.
Don't let it touch.
Hold it. No. No, turn the balloon. You have to turn the balloon.
Which way are we doing? This way?
Go this way.
Okay, that was.
I don't care how you do it. Go. Here it is. It?
Yep.
Then go ahead. Go. Go.
I don't know.
Stop. Just stop. I'm telling you right now, I've never done this before. Tell you what we're gonna do. I'm gonna put these in 2 separate bags. We'll put one bar in the camera, the other bar on the opposite side. All right, so 3 and 3. We'll try and weight them out. You guys can masking tape these to the side. These are going to the edge of space, baby. We're gonna have these for the rest of our lives. Let's do it. Walking away. Keep going. Just keep walking away. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a screaming success. AP Physics class of 2012. Woo! Hold on to the platform. There we go. Everybody here. Everybody hold on. Hold up over your head. Over your as high as you can. 1, 2, 3, let her go. 1, 2, 3, let her go. Yes!
See you later.
So to summarize, the guidelines for infusion And you can't always cover all 4 of these guidelines, but try to cover as many as possible. An activity that does not always have a single predetermined correct answer. Again, we're trying to do the opposite of what typically is done in regular instruction. Something that young people do rather than simply sit and listen to. Something that is fun for most children, and obviously not everything can be fun for every child, but the majority of children should be able to get a great deal of enjoyment out of it. And something that has various levels of challenge to which interested students can escalate. I mentioned the group of young people who developed the cookie cutter and baking company, and that was just something that went on for an entire school year, and it kept getting better all the time. I'd like to end with my favorite cartoon that will help you remember the importance of infusion. No matter what you're teaching, no matter how routine your job is, you should try to do everything in your power to make it more interesting. So here's the executioner, and his job is simply to chop off heads. All day long he stands there, pulls the rope, and chops off heads. And he said, I got to do something to make this job more interesting. So think a little bit about how the executioner would make the job more interesting. And of course, here's the punchline to the cartoon. He's made the job more interesting in that manner. I think that learning is a very engaging and enjoyable process if we can just find some things to do to make it more interesting. And it's also the best way that I know to get groups of teachers to work together to develop their own creativity for jazzing up the regular curriculum. I hope this will be of interest to you, and I thank you very much.